thick log walls do not protect against the winter cold as reliably as is commonly believed. You stand in the middle of a spacious cabin on the American frontier, watching intently as the coals in the large stone hearth slowly die out. Outside, an icy wind howls monotonously, bringing with it an endless blanket of thick, dry snow. The temperature inside the room is steadily dropping, forcing you to look for new ways to preserve the last remnants of heat in this enclosed wooden structure. Watch the video to the end to learn how the settlers' architectural solutions help keep the temperature above freezing, even without a constant source of open fire. What if everything you've been taught is outdated? You stand in front of a massive stone fireplace and watch the last faint flashes on the charred pine logs. The wood ash slowly changes its structure, transitioning from a bright orange glow to a static dark gray hue. You feel a barely noticeable but steady cool breeze rising from the wooden floor. The heat from the heated granite stones still spreads throughout the room, creating a temporary zone of relative comfort around you. This state of thermal equilibrium will not last long, as the storm outside the walls gradually gains its full force. The stones of the hearth have been continuously heated for many hours and are now releasing their accumulated thermal energy into the surrounding space. You reach out your hands to the layer of ash and feel the even, dry thermal radiation. This heavy stone element of the structure serves as the main passive heat accumulator of your dwelling at the moment. The air within a 2-meter radius remains warm, but you notice the process of the inexorable narrowing of the boundaries of this thermal zone. With each passing hour, the invisible boundary of the cold front moves from the windows and doors to the center of the room. Your room is plunged into deep silence, interrupted only by the steady patter of dry snow on the outer log walls. You approach the massive table in the center of the room and sit down on a sturdy chair with a backrest. At this moment, you realize that you are completely physically isolated from the rest of the Great Plains. The walls of your dwelling, made of thick pine trunks, remain the only physical barrier between you and the raging elements. You begin to methodically analyze each joint between the logs in search of possible places where heated air could escape. The darkness outside the windows grows denser, completely erasing the familiar outlines of the nearby coniferous trees and hills. You light a small wick kerosene lamp to dispel the thick evening gloom in the center of the hut. The yellowish, even light brings out the rough, natural texture of the log walls and the dried clay plaster between them. This local lighting provides minimal heat transfer, but helps you navigate the confined space of the house with confidence. You watch intently as the flame remains perfectly still under the transparent glass shade of the lamp. The heat capacity of the massive construction timber now plays a decisive role in maintaining a stable indoor microclimate. The wooden logs cool slowly, gradually releasing the energy accumulated during the daylight hours into the living space. You touch the wall with your open palm and feel the dense, completely dry surface of the old wood. This structural barrier is capable of preventing the interior from freezing for several dozen hours. You understand the technical importance of the thickness of the logs from which these walls were built last year. The temperature in the corners of the room begins to differ noticeably from the warmer central part of the hut. You notice barely perceptible microscopic drafts penetrating through thin cracks in the dried insulating clay. The air you breathe becomes denser, cleaner, and heavier for normal, even lung breathing. You make a rational decision to insulate the least protected areas of the walls with available dense fabric materials. To do this, you use spare heavy blankets and wide strips of dense technical canvas. You hang the dense fabric along the north wall, creating an additional protective air layer inside the room. This barrier layer acts as a reliable buffer, significantly slowing down the cooling of the main volume of air in the hut. You carefully secure the edges of the canvas with thin wooden wedges, tightly hammered between the joints of thick logs. The fabric flutters slightly, absorbing the invisible currents of cold air from the freezing outer wall. Your work requires measured and precise movements so as not to waste unnecessary internal energy on unnecessary steps. You carefully examine and check the results of your manual labor in the dim light of the lamp. You stand in the middle of an empty room and listen to the monotonous, dull rumble behind the sturdy wooden walls. Every log in your house was laid by builders with the harsh winter storms of the Rocky Mountains in mind. The natural insulation between the logs, made of dry material and dense clay, is now undergoing its ultimate climate test. You realize that the quality of this initial insulation determines the current rate of temperature drop inside the room. The surrounding air in the room gradually and inevitably separates into distinct horizontal temperature zones. You lower your hand closer to the floor and clearly feel a layer of cool, dense air. The upper part of your living room still maintains acceptable conditions thanks to the basic laws of convection. You realize the urgent need to move your main resting place slightly above the level of the wooden floorboards. A frame bed on high legs becomes the most reasonable and logical choice in this developing situation. You approach a small window covered with thick, translucent material of animal origin instead of inaccessible glass. This historical substitute allows dim outside light to pass through, but is objectively a weak link in the overall thermal insulation of the house. You see a thin white edge of crystalline frost beginning to form at the very edges of the wooden frame. The cold penetrates this specific area much faster than through the monolithic log walls of your hut. You take the prepared thick wooden shutters and close them tightly from the inside of the room. The bolt slides into the mounting groove with a characteristic dull thud, completely cutting you off from the meager outside light. Now the central room is plunged into almost complete darkness, with no natural sunlight or shadows. You confidently navigate the familiar space solely by memory and the faint glow of a kerosene lamp. The closed, massive shutters create another protective layer of air between the room and the raging street. You feel a slight inner calm, knowing that you have successfully eliminated a major source of heat loss. The temperature in the enclosed space of the room continues to drop, but at a noticeably slower rate. You slowly return to the center of the wooden room and carefully sit down on the prepared raised seat. The silence in the house becomes an almost tangible physical quantity, constantly emphasizing your deep isolation. You pay close attention to your own breathing, which begins to leave barely noticeable translucent clouds in the air. This is a sure physical sign that the overall temperature in the hut is slowly approaching zero. You wrap yourself tightly in a thick woolen blanket, trying to retain your own body heat. Your body is now practically the only active source of heat in this isolated space. You try to move as little as possible so as not to waste valuable internal energy. The thick woolen fabric acts as an effective thermal barrier, trapping warm air close to your skin. You feel your frozen fingers slowly warming up, safely tucked away in the deep folds of the folded blanket. Your mind remains extremely clear, constantly analyzing the slightest temperature changes in your surroundings. You realize that there are still many long hours of continuous and quiet waiting ahead. Time begins to seem incredibly slow in the harsh conditions of extremely limited visibility and monotonous sounds. You listen carefully to the slight creaking of the ceiling rafters as they react to the powerful gusts of wind outside. The pitched roof structure takes on a tremendous physical load from the constantly accumulating dry snow. You have complete confidence in the inherent strength of the thick wooden beams, capable of withstanding this harsh natural onslaught. Your hearing is heightened to the maximum, methodically picking up any structural changes in the soundscape of the incessant storm. You shift your calm gaze to the fixed wooden shelves with food supplies along the blank wall. Tightly tied bags of flour and wooden barrels of grain have their own accumulated heat capacity. They release the grains of stored heat into the empty hut extremely slowly and imperceptibly. You realize the physical principle by which every object in the house now works to maintain the basic microclimate. The entire simple interior of your hut is transformed into a single interconnected system of passive energy conservation. Cold air concentrates in the corners of the hut, forming invisible geometric zones of greatly reduced temperature. You try to physically stay as far away as possible from the freezing exterior walls, remaining in the safe geometric center. The flame of the kerosene lamp trembles slightly from the barely noticeable internal currents of moving air. You look up at the horizontal ceiling beams and realize the true hidden function of your home's attic space. The air gap between the sloping roof and the flat ceiling of your room acts as a powerful thermal insulator. It physically prevents the heat rising upwards from instantly dissipating into the icy atmospheric front above the hut. The snow falling in a thick, even layer on the wooden shingles of the roof paradoxically only reinforces this basic protection. You realize that the current heavy snowfall is now your unwitting structural ally in the battle for degrees. The ceiling, made of tightly fitted boards, traps most of the rising warm air inside the living space. You carefully examine the joints between the boards noting the absence of visible gaps and cracks in this upper plane. Frontier settlers often cover the attic floor with dry leaves, earth, or sawdust to create an additional barrier. This thick layer of loose material did an excellent job of blocking upward convection currents. You trust this time-tested technology, which now protects you from rapid freezing. The absence of familiar visual cues forces your brain to focus on the small details of the cabin's interior. You study the texture of your wool blanket, noticing every rough thread and knot on the surface of the fabric. These simple material things take on enormous significance in the context of a total struggle to maintain temperature. You mentally go through the inventory of the house, assessing the usefulness of each item in terms of thermal insulation. Your thinking becomes extremely pragmatic, discarding any extraneous, abstract reasoning. After a few hours, you decide to check the temperature of the thick wooden floor in the coldest corner of the room. You carefully stick your hand out from under the blanket and touch the far pine boards at the junction with the wall. The surface feels absolutely icy, as if it were not inside the hut, but right on the snow-covered street. This is direct evidence that the room's thermal buffer continues to slowly but surely deplete. You quickly return your hand to its warm shelter, fixing this climatic fact in your mind. The difference between your body temperature and the ambient air temperature reaches significant physical values. You feel the external environment methodically trying to draw the last of the energy from your protective cocoon. At moments like this, the fragility of human existence on the edge of unexplored wilderness becomes apparent. You understand the motives of the frontier pioneers who spent weeks carefully caulking every small crack. Their survival depended directly on the quality of the handiwork they did before the first cold weather set in. The lamp on the table begins to hiss faintly, signaling a critical drop in kerosene levels. You watch as the yellow flame shrinks and begins to flicker slightly on the charred wick. This means that complete visual isolation is imminent inside the cooling wooden space. You mentally prepare yourself for the transition to a new waiting mode, where your only guide will be your sense of touch. You feel no fear, only a cold understanding of the inevitability of physical processes. In complete darkness, you begin the process of preparing for a long period of motionless sleep. You have already moved your straw mattress onto a wooden bed, raising it half a meter above the cold floor. This elevation saves you from contact with the densest and coldest layer of air that has accumulated below. You carefully spread out a thick layer of straw, creating an even insulating cushion between your body and the boards. This natural material is excellent at trapping air pockets, acting as an effective barrier against freezing. You lie on your back and begin to methodically cover yourself with the prepared layers of dense materials. The first layer is a soft fabric cover that fits snugly against the surface of your warm clothing. The second layer is a heavy wool blanket, which immediately creates noticeable pressure on the body. The third layer is a thick animal skin, fur side in, providing maximum heat retention. Your task is to create an airtight cocoon with minimal space for air circulation. You carefully tuck the edges of all layers under yourself, eliminating the possibility of drafts. Inside this multi-layered shelter, you can physically feel the weight of the insulating materials. This pressure has a calming effect, reducing your heart rate and slowing your overall breathing rhythm. You breathe slowly and shallowly so that the warm air from your lungs does not escape too quickly. Your face remains the only area in contact with the cool room air, which is becoming increasingly sharp. You periodically pull the edge of the wool blanket up to your nose, warming the air you breathe in. From time to time, you wake up from particularly strong gusts of wind shaking the structure of the hut. At these moments, you check the integrity of your cocoon, adjusting the shifted edges of the heavy blankets. Judging by the sensation on the exposed part of your face, the air temperature in the room has dropped below zero. You can tell by the slight tingling on your cheeks and the rapid cooling of the moist vapor you exhale. Your cocoon remains a reliable capsule of life in the middle of this freezing wooden rectangle. You close your eyes again, returning to a state of necessary energetic rest. The breathing process becomes the main indicator of your current physical condition in the darkness. You take even breaths through your nose, allowing the cold air to warm up before it enters your lungs. You exhale slowly to minimize the loss of precious moisture and internal body temperature. This breathing technique was used by all experienced frontier conquerors in extreme winter overnight conditions. You are simply following the basic energy conservation instincts that have been embedded in human physiology for centuries. Somewhere in the corner of the room, there is a loud crack caused by the thermal compression of a massive log. This sharp sound momentarily breaks the monotonous acoustics of the blizzard and makes you flinch. The wood reacts to the sharp drop in temperature by changing its internal structural stresses. You know that this is a natural physical process that does not threaten the overall integrity of the sturdy log cabin. You relax your muscles again, allowing your body to sink deeper into the soft straw bedding. The absence of light erases the boundaries between the hours, turning the night into a single continuous stream of time. You cannot determine how much time has passed since the flame in your kerosene lamp went out. Your only internal timekeeper is your periods of sleep and brief moments of forced wakefulness. You focus on the sensations of your own body, completely ignoring the aggressive environment outside the walls. Your main goal is to wait for the storm to subside in the morning without losing critical internal energy. You continue to lie in the dark, realizing that the air around your shelter has become completely different. With the temperature falling below zero, the absolute humidity inside the wooden room has dropped sharply. The moisture present in the room air has begun to actively crystallize on the coldest surfaces of the hut. You realize that the inner surfaces of the outer walls are now covered with a thin layer of frost, invisible in the dark. This crystallization process makes the air you breathe scorching dry and crystal clear. The change in the density of the cold air directly affects the propagation of acoustic waves inside the room. You notice that sounds from outside are now transmitted through the wooden walls with greater sharpness and clarity. The hum of the wind in the empty stone chimney takes on new, higher and ringing tones. You can clearly hear the fine particles of dry ice scraping against the wooden shutters of your windows. This acoustic transparency is a direct result of the freezing of your home's construction materials. Your body inside the cocoon continues to function in a mode of maximum conservation of basic energy. You feel a uniform warmth distributed throughout your limbs, despite the surrounding frost. The dense materials of the blankets do not let the cold through, but their weight begins to cause a slight feeling of muscle fatigue. You make slow, limited movements with your fingers and toes to maintain normal blood flow. These microscopic exercises help to avoid blood stagnation without compromising the integrity of your thermal envelope. The sharp contrast between your body heat and the cold of the room creates a distinct microclimate under the blanket. You notice a faint smell of natural wool and tanned leather, which becomes more concentrated. This specific aroma is an integral part of winter survival in the classic American frontier. You breathe evenly and calmly, accepting these smells as markers of your current physical safety. Your body has fully adapted to the confined space and lack of fresh airflow. Somewhere on the wooden shelves, invisible changes are taking place with your food supplies. You know that the water left in the metal pot has long since turned into a solid ice monolith. The expansion of the freezing liquid probably caused the characteristic creaking of metal utensils a few hours ago. Solid foods such as salted meat and flour have become even harder due to the crystallization of residual moisture. You realize that using them in the future will require a long process of gradual thawing. The silence between gusts of wind becomes deeper and more piercing as the night progresses. You lie with your eyes closed, listening to the absolute emptiness that is characteristic only of severe frosts. At such moments, the hut seems not just a building, but an inanimate object frozen in time. You feel like a tiny warm spot inside a huge frozen space of wild nature. This awareness of the scale of the elements makes you pull the edges of the heavy wool blanket even tighter around you. You mentally return to the design of your house, assessing the correctness of the architectural decisions you made. The absence of unnecessary windows and the low ceiling are now working to preserve your life with maximum efficiency. You remember how difficult it was to lift massive logs during construction, and you understand the justification for those efforts. Every extra inch of wood thickness now translates into additional fractions of a degree of heat retained. Your cabin proves its functional viability under real climatic stress. The absence of active snowfall makes the outside air even drier and more permeable to frost. The temperature inside the hut reaches its historic low during these 48 hours of isolation. You feel the frosty air trying to penetrate through the smallest folds of your shelter on your face. You minimize the area of exposed skin, leaving only a small gap for oxygen to enter. Your task for the next few hours remains the same: to stay warm and wait for the external conditions to change. After an indefinite number of hours, you notice a subtle change in the density of the darkness surrounding you. A microscopic fraction of morning light begins to penetrate through the translucent material on the shuttered windows. This dim gray background allows you to distinguish the blurred contours of the room for the first time in a long time. You open your eyes wider, allowing your vision to adapt to this minimal level of light. The process of regaining visual perception is extremely slow due to the thick layer of ice on the windows. You examine the food shelves on the opposite wall of your log cabin. As you suspected, the water in the metal bucket has turned into a solid mass of ice with a convex surface. The wooden walls of the barrels appear to be covered with a thin layer of crystallized atmospheric moisture. All objects in the room have acquired the same ambient temperature, becoming part of this frosty diorama. Your hut is now an ideal refrigerator for storing supplies, but hostile to humans. The light from the windows becomes a little brighter, allowing you to see the details of the wooden table in the center of the room. The surface of the rough pine board seems even drier and more lifeless in these harsh conditions. You notice that the kerosene lamp left on since the evening is covered with a thin frosty web on the inside. The lack of liquid fuel has allowed the metal and glass to completely obey the laws of thermodynamics in the empty house. You commit these details to memory as evidence of successfully passing the critical phase of the test. Despite the deep freezing of the interior, you note the overall integrity of the structure of your log house. The thick logs did not develop deep longitudinal cracks, withstanding the powerful temperature change without structural damage. The clay plaster remained in place, frozen in a hard, stone-like state. You realize that frontier architecture has once again proven its reliability and functional practicality. Your hut has withstood the elements, fulfilling its main task, preserving your life. You continue to lie in your cocoon, planning your next steps in the extremely cold room. There is no practical point in getting up now, as you have no way of quickly starting a fire. You need to wait until the sun rises higher and begins to warm the outer wall slightly. This passive solar heating can add a few degrees to the air temperature inside the wooden structure. You decide to remain in energy-saving mode for a few more long hours. Gradually, the sunlight shining through the ice and frost on the windows takes on a yellowish tint. This indicates that the sky outside has cleared of clouds and the blizzard has finally stopped. You feel a slight change in the atmosphere of the room, associated with the stabilization of the outside atmospheric pressure. The surrounding cold remains the same, but the psychological pressure of darkness and storm completely disappears. The daylight hours do not bring instant relief to your frozen log cabin. The winter sun on the Great Plains is low on the horizon, providing plenty of light but little real warmth. You remain inside your multi-layered sleeping bag, watching the play of dim rays on the floor. The frosty air in the room remains still and heavy, like a transparent icy liquid. You realize that the process of naturally warming up a frozen log cabin will take much longer than cooling it down. After spending many hours in a state of minimal activity, your body needs to replenish its calories. You feel a slight hunger, but suppress it with a rational understanding of the current situation. Any active movement outside the shelter will lead to a tremendous loss of accumulated heat, which will be difficult to recover. You decide to ignore your physiological signals and continue your passive survival tactics. Your willpower is now as important a tool as the thickness of your wool blanket. You analyze your physical condition, systematically checking the sensitivity of all your limbs. Your fingers and toes respond with a slight tingling sensation, indicating that your circulatory system is functioning normally. The temperature at your core remains stable thanks to excellent insulation. You are not experiencing critical hypothermia, only constant contact between your exposed skin and the frosty air. You periodically rub your cheeks with your dry palm, maintaining a superficial flow of warm blood to your vessels. The silence in the house becomes absolute, devoid of even the faint hum of the wind in the cold chimney. You hear only your own measured breathing and the occasional creaking of wood reacting to sunlight. The outer walls of the hut, facing south, begin to absorb the meager solar radiation extremely slowly. This process is invisible to the eye, but it is the only source of energy entering your closed system. You wait patiently for this faint heat to begin to penetrate through the thickness of the pine logs inside. You recall the stories of old trappers about how they survived similar multi-day frosts in the mountains. Their main advice was always to remain still and not to panic in a closed space. Any hasty action, any attempt to quickly change the situation, only led to a fatal loss of heat. You follow this historical wisdom, turning yourself into a patient observer of physical processes. Your task is simply to exist inside this reliable wooden box until favorable conditions arrive. Your gaze slides over the frost-covered joints of the logs, studying the intricate patterns of crystallized moisture. You notice that in places where direct sunlight falls, the frost begins to thin slightly. The process of sublimation transforms solid ice directly into a gaseous state, bypassing the liquid phase due to the extreme cold. This physical phenomenon serves as a weak indicator that the surface temperature is slowly but surely rising. You record these microscopic changes as positive markers of your continued successful survival. Daylight in the cabin reaches its peak, creating sharp contrasting shadows on the log floor. You estimate the time to be around noon, based on the angle of the rays through the frozen window. The air temperature inside has risen by a few insignificant fractions of a degree, but still remains below freezing. You make a conscious decision to stay in bed until passive heating reaches its peak. Your survival strategy is based on precise calculation and understanding of the laws of heat exchange in a wooden structure. Sunlight begins to slowly shift across the plank floor, signaling the onset of the second half of a short winter day. You remain in a state of deep physical rest, conserving every unit of stored biological energy. The frost in the room no longer feels like a sharp, aggressive force. It has transitioned into a stage of steady, static cold. You realize that the temperature has already bottomed out, and the hut is gradually beginning to adapt to the new conditions. Your attention shifts from passive observation to actively planning your next logistical steps in your mind. The first thing you need to do after leaving your shelter is to restore blood circulation throughout your body. You mentally rehearse a set of quick physical exercises that you need to perform immediately after removing the heavy blankets. These movements should not be too intense, so as not to cause sudden sweating and subsequent rapid hypothermia. Your task is to smoothly accelerate the flow of warm blood from the core of your body to your frozen limbs. You know exactly the sequence of actions, honed by generations of pioneers of the American Wild West in harsh winter conditions. The next critical step is to organize a primary source of fire to heat a small space. You remember the exact location of the flint, tinder, and dry kindling left on the edge of the massive stone hearth. Access to these materials must be done blindly, relying only on muscle memory and tactile sensations. You mentally visualize the process of striking a spark and fanning the first faint flame in a handful of dry grass. This moment will require maximum concentration and firmness of your frozen hands in the icy air of the room. Assessing the available fuel resources is key to maintaining a stable temperature in the coming days. You know that there is a small pile of dry, chopped hardwood logs stacked next to the fireplace. This supply should be enough for the first few hours of intense burning to initially heat up the masonry. To keep the fire going, you will need to go outside to the main woodshed, which is covered with a thick layer of snow. You realize that this trip will involve serious physical exertion in the bitterly cold wind. You analyze the state of your food supplies, stored on icy wooden shelves along the north wall. The water frozen in a metal bucket will require a significant amount of time and heat energy to return to a liquid state. Thawing hard pieces of salted meat must also be done gradually so as not to spoil this valuable food product. You plan your first meal, which should consist of hot broth to quickly warm you up from the inside. These logistical calculations help you stay clear-headed and not succumb to irrational feelings of winter panic. You check the seal of your multi-layered sleeping cocoon again, carefully tucking in the edges of the heavy wool blankets. The air inside the shelter remains warm and comfortable, contrasting with the icy atmosphere of the rest of the room. Your body functions in an optimal energy-saving mode, consuming a minimum of valuable internal physiological resources. You take a few deep, controlled breaths through your nose, calming your central nervous system before another night. Your confidence in your own strength and the reliability of the wooden log cabin remains unshakable. The process of survival on the edge of civilization has always come down to the ability to wait and correctly distribute available resources. You understand that these 48 hours of isolation are a standard climatic test of endurance for settlers. Your architectural structure has successfully withstood the onslaught of the elements, preventing the cold from instantly killing everything inside. Now your task is to competently exit this state of static temperature equilibrium. You fall into a peaceful sleep knowing that the worst part of the frosty ordeal is behind you. Early morning begins with a slight change in atmospheric pressure inside your log structure. You open your eyes and immediately notice that the air in the room has become less harsh when you take a deep breath. The light shining through the frozen windows indicates the onset of a clear, windless winter day over the Great Plains. The frost still holds strong, but its intensity has noticeably decreased compared to the previous days. You realize that the optimal moment has come to stop passive waiting and move on to active action. You slowly begin the process of physically awakening your body, making smooth movements with your fingers and toes. Your muscles respond with slight stiffness after a long period of immobility under the weight of layers of wool. You gradually increase the range of motion, accelerating the stagnant warm blood throughout your body's circulatory system. Your task is to prepare your body for the sudden temperature shock that will inevitably follow when you open your sleeping cocoon. You perform these isometric exercises with methodical precision, preventing any beads of sweat from appearing. After shedding the top layer of heavy skins, you instantly feel the aggressive touch of the frosty room air. You don't allow yourself to linger, quickly throwing off the remaining woolen blankets and rising from the straw mattress. The cold burns your exposed skin, causing you to instinctively clench your jaw and speed up your planned movements. You quickly put on additional layers of dry clothing that have been lying next to your bed all this time. Your shoes feel incredibly stiff and cold, but you quickly lace them up with your freezing fingers. You immediately go to the stone hearth, where the necessary materials for starting a fire have been prepared in advance. Your fingers work quickly and precisely, removing the flint and dry tinder from a small leather pouch. You strike the flint sharply with a piece of steel, sending a shower of bright sparks right into the center of the dry tinder. Several attempts fail due to your trembling hands, but you remain completely calm inside. Finally, a single spark catches hold of the material, creating a tiny glowing red dot in the darkness of the ashes. You carefully take the tinder in your cupped palms and begin to evenly blow on the smoldering flame with your breath. Your breath, mixing with the frosty atmosphere, turns the small spark into a steady, bright flame. You quickly place the burning tinder under a handful of thin, dry twigs, prearranged in the shape of a teepee. The wood instantly bursts into flames, filling the icy space of the hut with the familiar smell of burning resinous pine. You feel the first, still faint wave of real warmth coming from the fire burning in the fireplace. You take the frozen metal pot with ice and place it on a special iron grate over the fire. The process of turning solid water into liquid will require a significant amount of firewood and patient waiting. You methodically continue to control the intensity of the flame, throwing in new portions of dry chopped wood. The surrounding interior gradually loses its lifeless, frozen appearance as the frost crystals on the walls melt. Your isolation from the cold has been successful, confirming the correctness of your chosen tactics of passive energy conservation in the dark. You realize that these 48 hours without fire have been an important personal experience of survival in extreme conditions. Your wooden hut has proven its architectural soundness, protecting you from deadly atmospheric influences. You prepare for a new day, full of the usual routine tasks to ensure your continued well-being. The fire in the stone fireplace reaches its optimal power, filling the space of the hut with even infrared radiation. You watch as the comfortable temperature zone steadily expands, pushing the dense frosty air into the far corners. The process of warming up the massive pine logs is slow, but you can already feel a significant improvement in the overall microclimate. The ice in the suspended metal pot finally begins to turn into water, emitting a quiet, characteristic hiss. You allow yourself to take off your heavy winter clothes, enjoying the forgotten feeling of freedom of movement. You approach the window and carefully open the massive interior shutters to assess the situation outside the house. Bright sunlight breaks through the thick layer of frozen ice, reflecting off the endless snowy plains. You see that the storm has left behind huge white snowdrifts, in some places reaching the bottom of the window frame. This snow cover will now serve as additional natural insulation for the lower part of your wooden foundation. You close the shutters, realizing that it is not worth going outside without extreme necessity in the coming days. Your attention shifts to assessing the condition of the interior wall surfaces, which have begun to thaw rapidly. The frost that formed earlier turns into drops of water that slowly trickle down the rough texture of the old wood. This experience has clearly demonstrated to you the effectiveness of the traditional architectural solutions used by the pioneers on the frontier. Thick log walls, a minimum number of openings, and a massive stone hearth have proven their functional necessity. You understand that survival in such conditions depends not on technological innovations, but on an understanding of the basic laws of physics. Passive heat conservation has proven to be as important a skill as the ability to quickly build a hot fire. Your hut has become not just a shelter, but a complex tool for interacting with an aggressive natural environment. You look around your dwelling, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the sturdy logs and reliable roof construction. This wooden house has become your personal fortress, protecting you from the icy breath of the endless plains. You are ready for the new challenges that the long and harsh winter on the American frontier will inevitably bring. The history of the settlement of these lands consists of thousands of similar episodes of quiet struggle for physical survival. Each settler went through their own 48 hours of cold, relying only on their wits and the strength of the walls. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, forming a unique culture of life on the edge of the known world. You have become part of this great history, testing the validity of old methods of heat conservation through your own experience. You finish your modest breakfast, watching the steady flames in the hearth and making plans for the day ahead. We have examined in detail the process of passive resistance of wooden structures to extreme sub-zero temperatures. You have learned how proper architecture and an understanding of the physics of materials help people survive without a constant source of energy. This experience highlights the importance of a thoughtful approach to construction in harsh climatic zones. What topics related to the survival and daily life of frontier pioneers would you like to see covered in our next videos? Write your suggestions in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new historical simulations.